Delighted to be joined by PFL Head of Fighter Operations, Dan Hardy. Dan, first of all, how good is it to have Francis Ngannou back in a cage?
Man, it's so good. It's so good. As an MMA fan, I've been missing him in the sport, you know. With his last couple of performances that he had, I just really feel like he was turning the corner and becoming a really well-rounded MMA fighter. And then the time he spent in boxing, you know, even though he didn't pick up a win, the time he spent working on his skills, I think he's going to add to his game. So I'm expecting a better version of him again this weekend.
You mentioned him being a more well-rounded fighter. The last time we saw him in the cage was January 2022. He went to a decision and he got the job done against Cyril Gane, but I think he was compromised because of his knee injuries. Has he fully recovered from those injuries, and you think we'll see that explosive, devastating Francis Ngannou against Renan Ferreira?
Yeah, I think we're going to see the best Francis yet. You know, I think obviously he's had his knee surgery and he's spent his time in boxing working on his footwork, which I think is going to make a big difference. You know, the challenge in MMA is sometimes not getting too close to people, and when you move at the speed that Francis moves at, you tend to find you either knock him out or you crash into a clinch. Now, we know he's got wrestling, so, you know, he can fall on that if he needs to, and I think he will have to use it against Renan to get the victory, even if he used it just to tire him out. But ultimately, I think, you know, the time he spent in boxing, the knee surgery, the refocusing of himself on mixed martial arts, I think we're going to see the best version of him yet.
Renan Ferreira has been very active in the time that Francis has been out of the cage. He's fought 8 times since the last time Francis was in the cage. How much do you think cage rust is a thing, and do you think that'll be a big effect in this fight?
You know, it's a good question. I think it affects everybody differently. I think some fighters it really does affect them, and other fighters they just don't seem to, you know, it doesn't seem to affect them no matter how long they spend out of the cage. I think the challenge here for Francis is going to be the excitement / anxiety, right? They kind of feel the same. You know, we can be excited and we can be anxious, but you've got that kind of trembly, I feel like I need to do something feeling. And when you've got Renan Ferreira standing waiting for you to move forward with that big right hand, the challenge is choosing the opportunity right. You know, if Francis moves at speed too quickly, he's going to run onto a right hand. If he doesn't set up his movement, he's going to run onto a right hand. So there's lots of different things that Francis has got to figure out in those opening seconds. And if he's anxious or excitable, that's going to work against his decision making. So he's got to try and keep his cool.
Rightly so, Francis is getting a lot of the headlines, but let's talk about Renan Ferreira. He's a man that made light work of Ryan Bader, one of the best heavyweights in the world at the time, done it within a round. How good is Renan Ferreira, and how good can he be going forward?
Look, I don't think we've even seen the peak of Renan Ferreira yet. I think there's still a lot of development in his game. I think, you know, he obviously made the right decision moving to American Top Team. You know, the coaches there speak so highly of him. His diligence, his commitment to training. But what they've done is they've highlighted what they need to bolster in his game to make him a well-rounded, formidable fighter. The times we've seen him struggle, he's been taken down and controlled. Now, can Francis do that? Potentially, yes. But this version of Renan Ferreira is going to be so much more difficult to take down and to hold down. So does Francis really want to waste that energy trying, right? Like, for me, there's a question around Renan's ground game and whether it's good enough to really cause Francis some problems. Like, I don't know if I would want to waste the energy trying if I was Francis, especially when you know you've got knockout power, right? You want to save that energy for the big punches. So I think the balancing of Renan's game is really going to give Francis a lot more to think about.
And you mentioned knockout power. That comes not only from the men involved, but also the glove that they're using. When I talk to you, Dan, I love to talk about the technicalities of the sport. Francis is coming from the 10-ounce gloves back down to the 4-ounce gloves. Are we going to see a knockout? And can you talk to me about the differences between using the bigger gloves and using the MMA gloves?
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect a knockout in this fight. You know, it could go either way as well. Both of these guys have got the ability to knock each other out. And Renan Ferreira, especially with his legs as well, like he's got long legs that can cover a lot of distance. He can knock out people with his feet and his knees. Now, what I will say about the gloves, it's very, very difficult to avoid an MMA glove. It's very difficult to see them coming. I actually had this conversation with Savannah Marshall after she made her MMA debut. And one thing that she said is that I didn't see the fists coming. I didn't see the punches coming because normally they're encased in a big glove that's usually not black as well, right? You get a red glove or a white glove or something, you see that coming around. You just see it coming. But Savannah wasn't seeing a lot of those punches coming because of the smaller gloves. And then the other thing, your traditional boxing guard, it's not narrow and tight enough. You've always got a leaky guard in MMA. That's what my boxing coach always said to me. There's always holes in your guard. So that's something else that Francis can't lean into this time around. His ability to cover and roll shots off his head and his guard like he could in boxing, he just can't do that in mixed martial arts. And obviously he knows that. But, you know, putting it into practice is a different thing.
Talked to Pete Murray earlier on, and I explained to him that the reason why I love MMA, I fell in love with MMA, is it was definitive, right? You know who the best champion is, or the best fighter is in each weight class. Obviously, at PFL, you've got a slightly different model. You've got 4 different franchises. I wouldn't say dilutes it, but do you think that kind of takes away from the aspect of the best fighting the best and knowing who is the best?
You know, I think certainly what we need to do with the PFL structure, and obviously now Bellator's become a part of the promotion as well, we need to do a better job of assimilating those 2 rosters to start with. And then second of all, we need to make sure that the path for the fighters makes sense. Now, obviously we've got PFL Europe, we've got PFL MENA, we've got Africa setting up, we've got a few other regions that are starting their own regional leagues, and those belts will be qualifiers to the global championship. But from that point, that's where we need to really nail everything down, so we know who our champion is and we know who our contenders are and how we get to become a contender. And at the moment, obviously with the merger of the 2 rosters and all the chaos of all these different events going on, we're just kind of doing what we can right now to get it, to get these fights together. Whereas in 2025, the structure's got to make a bit more sense, in my opinion. And I like the super fight belts. They're like the old Grand Prix belts for Pride and stuff. But I like standing champions. I like someone that holds the belt and defends the belt. And I think there is a value to that in combat sports because that's what's familiar to the fans. So I think maybe what we'll see is we'll have the regional leagues feed into the global season, and then the global season will feed into a championships, like a championship series, which is what we've got now with Bellator. And then that will be the equivalent to the UFC Elite. That's the way I see it working.
And looking further down this card, regardless of franchises or leagues, we all know that Johnny Eblen's one of the best middleweights, if not the best middleweight in the world. Rematch against Fabian Edwards. Really look forward to this one. Both men have had fights in between. Difficult fights, I'd say. Johnny went up in weight and got the win against Impa. How does this fight go between these two in this rematch that everybody's really looking forward to?
I think they're going to pick up where they left off. I think both of them, they had such good moments in that last fight, right? It seemed to me like Fabian knew what to expect from Eblen, and he had all the tools in his game to be able to stop him doing that, right? And then he just started to pick at him with his kicks and with his long-range punches. But it was quite competitive up to the point where Fabian landed that big elbow, right? The big elbow off the fence changed everything about that fight because it sent Eblen back to his corner with a really nasty cut on his face that the doctors did a good job of stopping the bleeding. But it also would have put in his mind that he probably had a round left. Right? Because if he'd have got to the end of the next round, the blood would have been in his eyes, the doctor would have come in and probably stopped the fight. So he was on a countdown, right? Whereas Fabian wasn't. Fabian had landed the shot that was really, a deciding factor in the fight. So it was almost like Fabian was like, right, I'm just needing to land a couple more shots on this cut and I'm good. Whereas Eblen's like, I need to make something happen in the next 2 minutes, otherwise I'm losing my belt. And he just showed that championship quality, right? He showed the determination to land his right hand. Normally going in right hand to a takedown, this time he doubled it up and really landed that second punch really well. I feel like Fabian's going to, well, I know he did because I've seen him in the gym. Disappointed, knows that he can beat this guy, knows he has all the skills to do it, and just knows that he needs to make it happen on the night. Whereas Eblen knows how dangerous Fabian is at close range. He's got to be cautious of those elbows and also knows that Fabian can defend his takedowns. So a lot of questions to be asked on both sides, but a really, really interesting rematch.
Like I mentioned before, I was talking to Pete Murray, and we threw out the idea of a 5 versus 5. That interpromotional chat has been going on quite a lot over the last couple of weeks. We've seen it in boxing, Matchroom versus Queensbury. It was a whitewash for Queensbury on that night. Do you think we can ever see that in terms of the PFL versus the UFC, 5 versus 5?
Yeah, absolutely I do, especially with the involvement of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That's what's really made the difference in boxing. Boxing was very fractured up until that point, and I think boxing now is better than it has been, certainly in my lifetime. You'd have to go back to Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank for it to be as interesting as it is now. That's the big difference, right? It's having someone, a third party, that can bring the promotions together, and I do think that Turki Al-Sheikh is that guy. He's the person that can bring Peter Murray and Dana White into a room together and go, look, you've got heavyweights, he's got heavyweights, I've got money. Let's make it happen.
Put up 5 fighters from PFL to take on UFC fighters.
Oh, man, okay. What, champs v champs? Yeah. Well,
it doesn't have to be a champ. Just be your 5 best fighters.
Okay. Well, let me see. Well, I mean, Impa Kasanganay, given the fact that he won the championship last year, you've got to put him in there. I'd put him in there against light heavyweight, and I put him in there against Poatan.
I was going to say.
And I mean, that's a tough fight. I will say that is a tough fight, but why not? Yeah. I think, I mean, the Bellator welterweight division's been really, really strong this year. It is also in the PFL as well. So, we've got Musayev coming through. We've got, Jason Jackson potentially going to get his belt back. I would put either of those guys in against any of the welterweights. We've got AJ McKee, Said Nurmagomedov, like, again, guys that could compete with the UFC. What I will say right now is, I mean, the UFC doesn't really have a featherweight division since Nunes retired, but I think we've got the best featherweights on the planet in the women's division, and I would also say the men's divisions as well. I would. That's a good question. I want to sit and look through the rosters now and pick out the teams, because that'd be a really interesting one.
We talked to people at the PFL, talked to yourself, talked to Peter Murray. They're up for it. Dana White's not. Do you think he's a little bit scared?
I don't think he's scared, not at all. I think Dana understands what he needs to do to keep his promotion moving forward, and I mean, they are the leader of the sport right now, and it doesn't surprise me that they don't want to do any of these collaborations. They've just not worked out well for the UFC in the past, right? It didn't work out well when they did it with Pride. Took Chuck Liddell over there, got beat up. McGregor and the Maymac thing, that was good for everybody as far as combat sports go, but not good for the UFC because it took McGregor away from them, and obviously he makes tremendous amounts of money for them. So again, they're going to shy away from those kind of things just purely because it's not benefited the promotion up to this point. But there was also a time when Dana said that women would never fight in the UFC, right? And that's now, obviously they're a mainstay of the sport of mixed martial arts, women and men, sharing fight cards and occupying the same spaces on the cards. So things do change. Dana can be hard-headed, but he is also a very smart and a very adaptable person. And I think if it makes sense to him, then he'll do it. And it just doesn't make sense right now, but I think it will in the near future.
You mentioned the word adaptable. That's what the PFL were when it came to Francis Ngannou. Obviously, a huge signing for the organisation, but allowed him to go over to boxing and test himself against the best heavyweights of the generation. What does Francis Ngannou's future look like with the PFL beyond this fight with Renan Ferreira?
Man, honestly, we talk a lot about Francis and legacy, right? And I don't think his legacy really is going to be the same in combat sports as it is when he retires from combat sports. I think his impact on the African continent for mixed martial arts is going to be tremendous. Already he's having a big impact. I get messages constantly from fighters. I want to be a part of PFL Africa. Can you put me in contact with Francis? And he's already started this wave of interest across the African continent, and I really feel like his legacy will be defined by what he does after his competitive career. But he's got a bright future ahead of him, and he's going to make a big difference for a lot of fighters.
Got a couple more. Cyborg versus Larissa Pacheco. Big fight. Fighters at the other, like each end of their career. You look at Cyborg, 39 years old, is now fighting once a year really. 2022, 2023, it's her first fight this year. And you look at Larissa, just been on a tear for the last 11 fights. How's that fight go?
Man, this very much could be a changing of the guard here, because Cyborg's been a mainstay, one of the most dominant fighters in the women's divisions for her whole career pretty much. But you look at what Larissa Pacheco's done in the past couple of years, and for me, she's really emerged into a very, very well-rounded mixed martial artist that can compete with anybody in the divisions. She's got the aggression and the power of Cyborg. She's got the striking ability, the footwork, and the cage control. But she can also grapple, and that's really something that we've not seen a great deal from Cyborg. She's been putting a few things out this week where she's working rear naked chokes and stuff, and I'm like, I think Larissa Pacheco's ground game has got her on point. I think we're going to see a much better version of Cyborg because of how competitive Pacheco is. But ultimately, I think Larissa she's got the skills everywhere in the fight to take this and get the win. Whereas Cyborg, I think she needs to keep this one standing.
I've got one more. I know being rushed by the people behind the camera. We've got a new game or new feature on talkSPORT. It's called Who Walks Out. So we talked to Francis was talking yesterday about if you put Renan Ferreira, Tom Aspinall, and John Jones in a room, Renan Ferreira is most likely walking out of that room unscathed. Obviously, Dana White always talks about John Jones being the pound-for-pound best, and he's the man that walks out of the room if you're to put the best fighters in the world in the room together. So I've got a list of names. You tell me who walks out in these scenarios, right? Okay. So we'll start with the heavyweights. Francis, Tom Aspinall, or John Jones?
Francis.
A prime Conor McGregor, prime Max Holloway, or prime Volkanovski?
A prime Volkanovski.
He walks out, yeah?
I think he does.
Why is that?
Just because I think he's got the well-rounded game. Like, we saw what he was able to do against Max Holloway. I think Max Holloway in his prime beats Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor beat Max Holloway before his prime, but I think Max beats Conor, and I think Volk beats Max. You know, I think Volk does the same thing to Conor as he does to Max. He fries his brain, makes him work deep for his cardio, and then beats him on points.
Okay. Johnny Eblen, Dricus du Plessis, or Israel Adesanya?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, man, that is a tough one. Because honestly, I think like Adesanya is the best striker out of all three of them. There's no doubt about it. But I feel like the fact that his game's not well rounded enough puts him at the bottom of that pack, right? You know, if you'd have asked me before Adesanya fought du Plessis, I'd have put Adesanya at the top. But now I'm looking at du Plessis and Eblen and thinking, I feel like Eblen can out-wrestle him, you know? So I might say Eblen in that one, even though that's a more competitive bracket.
He's a cleaner worker as well. Chris Cyborg, Amanda Nunes, or Ronda Rousey?
Amanda Nunes.
We saw Nunes versus Cyborg already, and then Nunes versus Rousey as well. So we know that one already. Two more. Prime Tony Ferguson, Prime Islam Makhachev, or Prime Khabib?
Oh, man. I think Prime Makhachev.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do. Like, obviously, Khabib is an incredible fighter, but Makhachev picked up a knockout loss, and it made his striking so much better, right? It really leveled up his striking. I feel like Makhachev's like the 2.0 version of Khabib. He can do what Khabib did, but he can strike as well. I think Makhachev.
Finally, Prime GSP, Prime Kamaru Usman, or Prime Dan Hardy?
Prime GSP all day. Yeah. Prime GSP all day. Kamaru's a great fighter, but no one compares to GSP and his legacy.